Welcome to the Robert Hunt Financial Market Update. It's your host, Robert Hunt, where I look at the week's financial news that can be a bit confusing, misleading, and take you off course and help to make it actionable, understandable, and clear. What a week. What a show. We've got 3 articles. We're looking at what I believe was a Dallas Morning News article, but it's syndicated everywhere now, so now I'm not quite sure if it's just Dallas Morning News. Probably not. About bank branches and how these banks are dressing them up so that you, the customer, feel comfortable. We'll talk about why and the dark side of that. We're then looking at Mr. Scott Burns, who is just steady Eddie. I feel like he's been writing personal finance articles forever. And even when he said he was retiring, he didn't. So 7 Laws of Financial Security still hold that Scott wrote. We're then going to look at an article that contradicts at the surface much of the philosophy that is held here at the Robert Hunt Financial Market Update. Wall Street Journal. Bond investors are paying up for active managers again. What? We will look at the data behind the data because there are lies, there are darn lies, and then there are statistics. Perhaps you've heard that phrase. So at the top, headline, banks adapt branches so clients feel welcome. Biggest financial firms are now opening cafes and community centers. Now, at the top, I want to say I am delighted that these banks are making their lobbies better for you, the customer. In a vacuum, all things being equal, that's a good thing. What this article explains is that the pandemic hits, a lot of banks were closing branches. Oh no. And what is happening now is they are opening these branches so that they are less intimidating. Here's a quote from J.P. Morgan's head of community and business development at Consumer Banking. Coming to the branch can be intimidating, says Deirdre Portia. We're now creating these spaces so everyone can feel welcome. Okay. Portia leads a team of 150 employees who work at J.P. Morgan. J.P. Morgan's not alone. Capital One, what's in your wallet, opens its latest cafe in Union Square in May. A space that serves coffee and baked goods and allows anyone, Capital One customer, not to sit inside the cafe and work a network. I bet that's a mess, by the way. But I happen to be a Capital One customer, use their credit cards and their online bank. I like the app. I bet that is a zoo in Union Square. Quote here by Jennifer Windbeck, head of Capital One's retail bank branches. Banking shouldn't be that experience of someone sitting in a suit behind a desk talking about your loan application, but it should be someone who is sitting with you, offering to help you through those questions about money and finances. Alarm bells should be going off. Again, I'm disclosing I actually like Capital One. What we would prefer, Miss Winbeck, if I could speak to her with respect, is that not only would you physically sit alongside us, but that the product would also come alongside us and not be across the table, because this is the gotcha in all these spaces. The products are pushed in a vacuum, and these beautiful branches are not your friend. So this is just anecdote for a larger dynamic that I see regularly, and I see it everywhere, but we all like nice things, tickets to a game, a warm, quote-unquote, free coffee at one of these cafe branches that a financial institution's putting on. But if we advocate for ourselves, if we are actually optimizing our personal finances, you're not going to put your money on deposit at J.P. Morgan. Nope, probably not. Now, maybe their private bank has something, but if you're just coming in the retail side and they're paying you nothing on deposits, it is really expensive to go into that nice cafe. Similarly, it could be, although I actually like Capital One, it could be the Capital One nice branch that it isn't optimal for you. So as a consumer, we've got to be ruthless at times, advocating for ourselves and seeking to optimize not the nice cafe we step into or the person that's sitting alongside us, supposedly, in our financial dealings. Because in that moment, when you walk into that bank branch, it's like walking into a Toyota dealership. You're going to get a Toyota. I guarantee it. If you elect to get a mortgage, you're going to get a J.P. Morgan product. If you're a Capital One product. If you want a credit card, you're going to get a J.P. Morgan credit card or Capital One credit card. we've got to be willing to hold financial institutions loosely, and that's including me. So even though I might promote Vanguard or Charles Schwab as an option or using a local community bank, I've got to be willing, when those institutions stop serving my interest, to leave. And that's only going to be harder if you're on the gift carousel or the nice cafes that you like. A lot of times these things end up costing you a lot. So this can sometimes run contrary to my belief, as you've heard. Keep that investing simple, because oftentimes switching institutions is not simple. So I don't say to do this lightly, but at the end of the day, there might be a time when you need to switch it around. I think an optimal situation is have a brick and mortar, maybe a community bank that you walk into if you need it, and then use Vanguard, use Charles Schwab. Actually, use a brokerage firm to hold your cash, where you can, with a click of a button, move from one certificate of deposit to another, or one money market fund to another. It eliminates some of the friction that would occur in moving from one bank to another, because it's kind of hard to move from one bank to another. You've got credit cards, and you've got a checking account, and you've got recurring charges and all the rest. So I like just keep a little bit of money at a local bank that's got good service, and then be willing to be open-handed on moving your money around to the best depository institution that you can find. Mr. Scott Burns, the longtime financial columnist, writes this: 7 laws of financial security still hold. Check out this intro and how long he's been doing this. Financial services industry wants us to think that investing and personal finance are complicated. See, I love this guy. That was its approach in the late 1960s when I started writing about personal finance. It was still the approach in the late 1970s when I became a newspaper columnist, a time so long ago that my first columns were written on a Royal Office typewriter. Complication continues, he keeps writing. Complication continues to be a major marketing tool today, supported by academics with even greater computing power, ever larger database, and a sophistication of math and statistics that boggles the mind. But, and here he says, here's the kicker, but the 7 laws of personal finance were good 50 years ago, and they are good today. Better still, the arrival of index investing, exchange-traded index funds, and the elimination of commissions have made it incredible, easy, and inexpensive to be a successful investor and saver. Bingo. Man, Scott Burns, incredible. He's been fighting the good fight for decades. I'm over here a couple years in. He's been just telling us exactly what we need to be told. And it shouldn't surprise us that he is more independent in nature. You know, Scott Burns isn't greeting you at a cafe with a muffin saying, "Welcome to Capital One" or "Welcome to JP Morgan." He's just saying, "I'm Scott Burns. That's what I think." So I'm going to read these 7 laws. And this is simple stuff, straightforward, but we got to kind of pound it into our heads. Spend less than you earn. Burns said millions still don't grasp this and think that there's a whole host of other problems, but this is it. Spend less than you earn. It's number 1. Number 2, make your saving automatic. This goes back to keeping it simple. So he recommends a 401k plan, or you can do it automatic transfer to your investment account, but make it automatic. Number 3, take free money. So he's talking about company-provided 401k or 403bs. So if there's free money, do it. Next, number 4, keep the return on your money. Share as little as possible with the tax man and be tight-fisted with your commission or advisory dollars. Ding, 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 ding. So when he says keep the return on your money, he's saying don't get sucked into a high-priced product. Don't get sucked into a high-priced advisory relationship. You need to keep your return. This is Mr. John Bogle himself saying this as well. So he says getting a high return on your investments is only as good as if you get the return. Next is owe as little as possible. Well, this is the kind of a Dave Ramsey-esque, but he says try to be debt-free. Mortgage included. Now, he references higher rates today, which make paying off a mortgage even more appealing. And this is one of my favorite ones. He says trust the power of average. Average? We're not average. We're special. But hold on. He says, for the handful who want great wealth, competition for the highest returns is essential. For the rest of us, it is only necessary to participate in the broad creation of wealth. That means favoring major index investments unless there's a compelling reason to bet on a particular competitor. So he's telling you, and by the way, there's nothing average about average. I always tell folks, be average. You'll be in the top 10% of all investors. Now, that doesn't seem average, does it? But that's what the data tells us. Then he says, tend your own garden. This is interesting. He says we have limited control over the return on our investments. We have great control over the amount of money we invest and where we invest it. Isn't that truth, Mr. Burns? Isn't that the truth? So he says he printed the 7 Laws first print in January of 1997. So this is a great review. So keep it simple, simple, simple. You can almost always go simpler. I could listen to that sermon myself. We can go simpler. And oftentimes when we're looking for solutions, they're oftentimes the hard ones staring us in the face. Like, what's your savings rate? What do you that's a big deal. It's not necessarily that you need a 30% return every year. 8% will do. The rule of 72 says if you earn 7.2% annually, your money will double roughly every decade. So the rule of 72 says you can take your rate of return divided into 72 and get how many years it takes your money to double. So if we earned a 10% rate of return, rule of 72, our money doubles every 7.2 years. A double. There are institutions that would fall over themselves if I could promise them a double every 7.2 years if you got a 10% return. That is. And yet, the siren song continues, and folks are promising 30% returns, not always disclosing the risk, not always knowing the risks themselves. And by the way, there's nothing wrong with 30% returns. However, in order to get those, you're probably taking on considerable risk, using leverage, or betting on a really big home run happening to get those consistently. So, last article, bond investors are paying up for active fund managers. Check this out, guys. This just flies in the face of everything I'm telling you. Subheadline, about 74% of active funds beat their benchmarks in the last 12 months. What? This is by Vicky Gihuang wrote this. What? I didn't think this was mathematically possible. Well, it's possible in 1 year. So what maybe could have happened here is maybe the index, maybe the consensus in active management was maybe to go shorter duration. And so when interest rates rose, the index got hurt more than these active funds. I don't know. I'm speculating. But this article gives a whole host of reasons why that could happen. But hold on just 1 second. Here's the Robert Hunt Financial Market Update. We don't just hang out with 1 year data. I think 1 year data is some of the most dangerous data you can ever put your hands on. And yet, here it is in the Wall Street Journal. So I went back and I got this out of I laminated this one. This is the SPIVA report. You've probably heard me talk about the SPIVA report, SPIVA. This is the referee. Third party, S&P puts it out, helps us determine who's winning, the active managers or passive managers, meaning the index fund folks, passive managers, or the active fund folks, the higher paid bond pickers. Well, I went back and looked. This is year end 2022, so the data's pretty fresh. And check this out. Over a 15-year period, what percent of basically general government fund debt active funds underperform the benchmark? Okay. So what I'm reading to you is the percent of the active funds that underperform the benchmark over 15 years. 94%. Now, I thought this one was cool. What about intermediate government funds? So these are the ones where these government funds, the index will just absolutely trounce because there's not a lot of differentiation, right? Credit risk is the same because it's the U.S. government. 100% of active funds underperform their benchmark over a 15-year period. Government short-term, 94.44% underperform the benchmark over a 15-year period. Now, here's where it gets interesting. You get closer. The closest you get is when you start going into these, I call them junk credit. And none of them, there's never a probability that you'll beat the index, but you get close. You get so close. High yield funds, the iBoxx liquid high yield. Now it fails over a 5, 10, and 15-year period, but check this out. Over a 5-year period, only 68% underperform. 10-year period, only 69%. 15-year period, only 66% underperform. So that, you're getting at least within spitting distance of almost half. But on down the line, it's whenever you get closer to government credit, it's almost 100% win. So be wary, investor. Whenever someone puts something out that shows the active funds winning. Doesn't mean this data is wrong. In fact, I believe the data very well could have been that something occurred that allowed these active funds, like I mentioned, a rapid increase in rates could have left the index funds underperforming. I don't know, but over the long pull, this is not a game you want to play. And oh, by the way, once you're on the active fund carousel and you're betting on the man to pick your funds, you don't know how long they'll last. You're in the unenviable position of being a pilot with the trigger, hand on the trigger finger. What if they underperform for 1 year? Then what do you do? What if they underperform for 3 years? Do you pull the trigger then? What about 5 years? Certainly 5 years you pull the trigger. My experience is most folks pull the trigger after like 18 months of underperformance. It is so deep in the psyche of humans that they just cannot stand underperforming, that they'll bounce so fast. So with that in mind, and since we are normal humans, stick with our indexes. Don't listen to the siren song of active management. Bind your ears, bind yourself to the mast of the ship, and just keep sailing past it. And then we have a touch of time for Robert's Corner. And I was just reminded recently, as I pulled weeds in my yard, and I got blisters, so don't do that unless you wear gloves, that it gets harder to pull weeds the longer you wait to pull them. So there were some of these, I call them weeds, they were becoming small trees in my yard, little saplings that I was pulling out. And I remember how difficult it was. And I thought to myself, boy, this isn't so different from our personal financial lives. When we let things just creep, when we don't address problems in our personal finances, either with an investment we've made that we need to clean up, either with a banking relationship that we need to walk away from, or a personal advisory relationship we need to walk away from, if we just let it sit, which, by the way, is human nature. The old joke is inertia is the most powerful force in the universe. If we just hang out, let inertia do its thing, it's only getting harder. And what I've seen in my practice is whenever I meet folks who've been in a traditional financial advisory relationship, oftentimes it gets harder and harder to make the changes because of the tax implications. So if you're in a bunch of these active mutual funds and you've held them for 20, 30 years, well, we may not be able to sell them because the tax hit will be so huge, even with all the taxes you pay Uncle Sam, even though it's cheaper to go to the index fund, it may not make sense. So be willing to if you see a problem, address it, take the bull by the horns. And by the way, this only has to happen once. So with plenty of clients, I'm now meeting with them after they've kind of climbed the mountain and come down the other side, and they've kind of done it. All the hard parts on the front end. Once you've set up your systems, once you've got the good bank, your money's at Vanguard, maybe at Schwab, maybe at Fidelity, but it's a place with free trades where you can actually purchase things on your own, self-direct in a great environment. That's the hardest part, is that first step. I know there's another hard part. You got to stick with it. But we know how to stick with things, right? Because what are we going to do? We're going to keep our costs low, our investing simple, and our time horizon long, because that's what's going to give us the best shot on our investing journey. Until next time.